The morning sun was just starting to peek over the trees when Jake grabbed his fishing rod and headed down to the lake. He'd been up since 5:30, couldn't sleep with all the excitement. 3 months in his new house and he still couldn't believe he had his own private lake right in the backyard. The water was like glass, barely a ripple across the surface. Jake settled onto the wooden dock, the old boards creaking a little under his weight. He'd already had his coffee and now it was just him, the lake, and hopefully some fish. The previous owner had told him the lake was stocked with bass and bluegill. Jake had been itching to test that out since the day he moved in. He cast his line out, watching the lure plop into the water about 20 feet from the dock. Perfect. Now came the waiting part, which honestly Jake didn't mind one bit. This was what he'd dreamed about when he was stuck in his old apartment downtown. Peace and quiet, his own slice of nature. About 15 minutes in, he heard a car pulling up. Jake glanced back toward his property and saw a white SUV parking right at the edge of his lawn. A woman stepped out, and even from a distance, Jake could tell she meant business. She had a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other. Her heels were completely wrong for walking on grass, but that didn't stop her from marching straight toward him. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the peaceful morning like a knife. "You there? You can't be here." Jake reeled in his line and stood up, a little confused. He was definitely on his own property. He'd walked these boundaries a dozen times since buying the place. "Morning," Jake said, trying to be friendly. "Can I help you with something?" The woman was closer now, and Jake could see she was maybe in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a pantsuit that probably cost more than his fishing gear. Her expression was not friendly. "Can you help me?" she repeated, her voice dripping with irritation. "Yes, actually. You can help me by leaving immediately. This is HOA property and fishing here without authorization is strictly prohibited." Jake blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "This is my lake. I own this property. I'm Jake Wilson. I bought the house right there." He pointed to his home, which was clearly visible from where they stood. The woman's eyes narrowed. "I don't care what your name is or where you claim to live. I'm Patricia, the president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association, and I'm telling you this lake belongs to the HOA. It's been a community amenity for 15 years. Jake felt his stomach drop a little. This had to be some kind of mistake. "Look, Patricia, I really think there's been a misunderstanding here. When I bought this house, the lake was part of the deal. It's on my deed. I've got all the paperwork." "Impossible," Patricia said flatly. She tapped something on her phone, not even looking at him. "The lake is clearly designated as common area in our community bylaws. Every single resident knows this. It's been in our HOA documents since the development was built." "Well, I don't know what to tell you," Jake said, trying to keep his voice level. "But I own this lake. The title company, the real estate agent, my lawyer, everyone confirmed it before I closed on the property." Patricia's face was turning red now. "This is outrageous. You move into our community and immediately start trying to claim our amenities as your own? I've seen your type before. You think you can just do whatever you want without following the rules." Jake felt his own temper starting to rise, but he pushed it down. Getting angry wasn't going to help anything. "I'm not trying to claim anything that isn't mine. This lake is on my property. If you check the county records, you'll see I'm right." "I don't need to check anything," Patricia snapped. "I've been running this HOA for 8 years. I know every inch of this community. This lake has been used by our residents for over a decade. We maintain it, we stock it with fish, we take care of the landscaping around it. We even built this dock you're standing on." That actually gave Jake pause. The dock did look pretty new, but still, if it was his property, they shouldn't have been building anything on it without asking him first. "Maybe that's part of the problem," Jake said carefully. "If you've been maintaining property you don't actually own? Patricia's voice went up an octave. "That's it. I'm calling the police. We have a trespasser who refuses to leave HOA property, and I'm not going to stand here and argue about it." Jake's heart started pounding. "Wait, hold on. There's no need to call the police. Let's just figure this out like adults. We can look at the documents together." But Patricia was already dialing, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. "Yes, hello? I need to report a trespassing incident at Riverside Estates. We have a man who's refusing to leave our community lake. He's become argumentative and won't comply with HOA regulations." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Argumentative? He'd been nothing but polite. And trespassing on his own property? This was insane. Patricia finished her call and crossed her arms, glaring at him. The police are on their way. I suggest you gather your things and leave before they arrive. Otherwise, you'll be escorted off the property and you might face charges. I'm not going anywhere, Jake said, more firmly now. This is my land. I have every right to be here. And honestly, you're the one who's trespassing on my property right now. How dare you? Patricia sputtered. I've been coming to this lake for years. I've organized community fishing days here. Children have learned to fish on this dock. And now you want to take that away from them? Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone. I didn't even know people were using this lake. But that doesn't change the fact that I own it. We'll see about that, Patricia said coldly. When the police get here, we'll let them sort out who's right and who's wrong. They stood there in awkward silence, Patricia glaring at him from the shore while Jake remained on the dock. He thought about just leaving, avoiding the whole confrontation. But something in him refused to back down. He'd worked hard to buy this house. He'd saved for years to afford a place like this. And he'd specifically chosen this property because of the lake. He wasn't going to be bullied off his own land by someone with a clipboard and an attitude problem, HOA president or not. A few other people had started to notice the commotion. Jake could see a couple of neighbors peeking out their windows. One guy was walking his dog and had stopped at the edge of the property, clearly curious about what was going on. Great, just what Jake needed, an audience for his first major interaction with the neighborhood. Patricia noticed the onlookers too and seemed to stand up even straighter, like she was performing for them. This is exactly the kind of thing our HOA exists to prevent, she announced loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. People moving in and thinking the rules don't apply to them. Jake wanted to point out that he wasn't breaking any rules, but he kept his mouth shut. The police were coming, and he figured he'd save his explanations for them. Maybe they could be the voice of reason in all this. While they waited, Jake pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures of the lake and the dock, and one of Patricia standing there with her arms crossed. He wasn't sure if he'd need them, but something told him it was better to document everything. Patricia noticed and looked even more outraged, but she didn't say anything. The minutes ticked by slowly. Jake's peaceful morning of fishing had turned into a nightmare, and he hadn't even caught a single fish. He glanced at his tackle box sitting on the dock, at his rod still in his hand, and wondered how his simple hobby had escalated into a police situation. In the distance, he could hear sirens getting closer. His heart sank. He'd never had the cops called on him before in his life. He paid his taxes, followed the law, and kept to himself. And now here he was, about to be treated like a criminal for fishing on his own property. Patricia checked her watch and then her phone, a satisfied smile crossing her face. They'll be here any minute, she said. Last chance to leave on your own. Jake took a deep breath and looked out at the lake, at the morning sun reflecting off the water. I'm not leaving, he said quietly, because this is my home. The police cruiser pulled up about 20 minutes later, and Jake watched as two officers got out. One was younger, maybe in his 30s, and the other looked like he'd been on the force for a while. They both had that calm, professional look that cops get when they're not sure what kind of situation they're walking into. Patricia immediately rushed over to them, talking fast and pointing at Jake like he was some kind of dangerous criminal. Jake stayed where he was on the dock, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. He set his fishing rod down slowly and kept his hands where the officers could see them. The older officer held up a hand to Patricia, clearly trying to slow her down. Ma'am, just take a breath. We'll handle this. He turned to his partner. Why don't you talk to her, get her statement? I'll go speak with him. The officer walked toward the dock, his hand resting casually on his belt, not on his weapon or anything, just relaxed. That made Jake feel a little better. Morning, the officer said. His name tag read Thompson. Want to tell me what's going on here? Honestly, officer, I'm just trying to fish on my own property, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. I live right there. That's my house. I bought it 3 months ago, and this lake came with it. Officer Thompson nodded, taking out a small notepad. Okay, you got any ID on you? Proof of residence? Yeah, absolutely. Jake reached slowly for his back pocket, pulling out his wallet. He handed over his driver's license. And I've actually got my closing documents right here in my tackle box if you want to see them. The officer raised an eyebrow. You carry your closing documents when you go fishing? Jake couldn't help but laugh a little despite the situation. I know it sounds weird. I was actually reviewing the property lines earlier this week because I was thinking about putting up a small fence. Just happened to still have the papers with me. Lucky break, Thompson said, and there might have been the hint of a smile on his face. Let me see what you've got. Jake opened his tackle box and pulled out the folder he'd stuffed in there. Inside were copies of his deed, the survey map, and the title insurance paperwork. Thompson took them and started looking through them carefully, his eyes scanning the documents. Meanwhile, Patricia was still talking to the younger officer, her voice getting louder by the second. Jake could hear bits and pieces. 15 years. Community property. Outrageous. Needs to be arrested. Officer Thompson looked up from the papers. This deed does show the lake as part of your property. See these coordinates here? He pointed to a section of the document. That includes the body of water and approximately 2.5 acres around it. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. So I'm not crazy. This is my lake. According to this paperwork, yes. Thompson walked back toward his partner and Patricia, and Jake followed at a respectful distance. What did he tell you? Patricia demanded before Thompson could even open his mouth. Whatever it is, it's lies. This lake belongs to the HOA. I have documentation. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down, Thompson said firmly. I've reviewed his deed, and it appears the lake is included in his property purchase. Patricia's face went from red to almost purple. That's impossible. Show me. Those documents have to be fake. The younger officer, whose tag said Rodriguez, stepped in. Mrs. Henderson, nobody's saying anyone faked anything. But if you have documentation that shows the HOA owns this property, we'd like to see it. It's Hendricks, not Henderson, Patricia snapped. And of course I have documentation. It's in all our HOA records, our bylaws, our community maps. This lake has been listed as a common area amenity since this development was built in 2008. Okay, Rodriguez said patiently. Do you have those documents with you right now? Patricia fumbled with her phone. I have digital copies of the bylaws, and the community map is on our website. She started pulling up documents on her phone, thrusting the screen toward the officers. Thompson looked at what she was showing them. This shows the lake as an amenity, but I don't see any deed or title document. Do you have paperwork showing the HOA actually owns this land? The developer gave it to us when the community was established. Patricia insisted. It's been ours for 15 years. But do you have a deed? Thompson pressed gently. Something from the county showing a transfer of ownership to the HOA? Patricia hesitated, and Jake could see the first crack in her confidence. I'd have to check our files. But I'm telling you, we've been maintaining this property for years. We pay for the landscaping, we stock the fish, we built that dock. Everyone knows it's HOA property. Ma'am, using something and owning something are two different things in the eyes of the law, Rodriguez said. The fact that you've been maintaining it doesn't automatically mean you own it. This is ridiculous. Patricia turned to Jake, her eyes blazing. You knew this was HOA property when you moved in. You're trying to steal it from the community. I didn't know anything except what's on my deed, Jake said, trying to stay calm. I bought this house specifically because it had a private lake. That's what I was told, that's what the paperwork said, and that's what I paid for. Thompson handed Jake's documents back to him. Sir, based on what you've shown me, you have every legal right to be on this property. It's included in your deed with clear boundaries marked. You can't be serious, Patricia practically shouted.
I'm the HOA president.
I've been managing this community for 8 years. I think I know what property we own. With all due respect, ma'am, Rodriguez said, managing an HOA doesn't change property ownership. That's determined by deeds and titles registered with the county. Patricia pulled out her phone again. I'm calling our HOA attorney right now. This is not over, not by a long shot. She started dialing, pacing back and forth on Jake's lawn. Thompson turned to Jake. Look, this is clearly a civil matter, not a criminal one. There's no trespassing happening here based on the documents you've shown us. But I'd recommend you get a real estate attorney involved. Because this lady seems pretty determined to fight you on this. Yeah. I'm getting that impression, Jake said, watching Patricia angrily talking on her phone about 20 feet away. Has she been harassing you? Rodriguez asked. Before today, I mean. No, this is the first time I've met her, Jake admitted. I've only been living here 3 months. I work from home, keep to myself mostly. I didn't even know there was any confusion about the lake until she showed up this morning. Patricia came storming back over, her phone clutched in her hand. My attorney says this is theft of community property, and we will be pursuing legal action. He also says you officers need to confiscate those fake documents. Thompson's jaw tightened slightly. Ma'am, we're not confiscating anything. Those are legitimate county-recorded documents. If your attorney wants to challenge them, that's something you'll need to do through the courts. Then you're not going to do anything? Patricia demanded. You're just going to let him steal our lake? Nobody's stealing anything, Rodriguez said, his patience clearly wearing thin. This is a property dispute that needs to be resolved legally. We can't arrest someone for being on property they have a deed to. Patricia pointed a shaking finger at Jake. You haven't heard the last of this? The HOA will fight you on this with everything we have. This lake belongs to this community, and we're not going to let some outsider take it away. I'm not an outsider, I live here, Jake said quietly. And I'm not trying to take anything from anyone. I'm just trying to use my own property. Your property? Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. We'll see what a judge has to say about that. We have 15 years of documentation showing we've been maintaining and using this lake. That counts for something legally. It's called adverse possession, and my attorney assures me we have a strong case. Thompson and Rodriguez exchanged a look. Again, ma'am. That's something for the courts to decide, Thompson said. But for today, there's nothing illegal happening here. We're going to clear the scene. Unbelievable, Patricia muttered. Absolutely unbelievable. She turned and marched back to her SUV, her heels leaving little holes in Jake's lawn. Before she got in, she turned back one more time. This isn't over, Mr. Wilson. Not even close. She drove off, tires spinning a little on the grass before hitting the pavement. Jake stood there feeling like he'd just been through a war. You okay? Rodriguez asked. Yeah, I think so, Jake said, though his hands were shaking a little. This is not how I expected my morning to go. Thompson pulled out a business card. If she starts harassing you, give us a call. Keep copies of all your property documents somewhere safe. And seriously, get a lawyer. HOAs can be persistent. That's putting it mildly, Jake muttered. The officers headed back to their cruiser and Jake watched them drive away. A few neighbors were still watching from their yards, probably wondering what all the drama was about. He could already imagine the rumors spreading through the community. Jake looked back at the lake, at his fishing rod still lying on the dock, at the peaceful water that had started his day. He'd come out here for some quiet time, maybe catch a few fish. Instead, he'd made an enemy of the HOA president and apparently started a legal battle he hadn't even known existed. He picked up his rod and started reeling in the line he'd cast out almost an hour ago. The morning was ruined anyway. As he packed up his gear, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's words were true about one thing. This definitely wasn't over. Jake thought maybe things would cool down after the police visit. He was wrong. Dead wrong. A week later, he got a certified letter in the mail. The return address showed some fancy law firm downtown with 3 names that all sounded expensive. Jake's stomach dropped as he signed for it. Nothing good ever comes in a certified letter. He sat down at his kitchen table and opened it carefully. The letter was full of legal language that made his head spin, but the main point was crystal clear. The HOA was demanding he immediately stop using community property and threatening to sue him if he didn't comply. Attached were copies of what Patricia claimed were the original development plans from 2008, showing the lake highlighted in green as a common area amenity. Jake's wife, Linda, came in from the garage carrying grocery bags. She took one look at his face and set the bags down. What's wrong? The HOA is threatening to sue me. Jake handed her the letter. They're saying I'm trespassing on their property. Linda read through it, her expression getting darker with each paragraph. This is insane. We have the deed. The title company verified everything before we bought this place. I know. Jake rubbed his face tiredly, but apparently they're not backing down. They're claiming something called adverse possession, basically saying that because they've been using the lake for 15 years, it should be theirs even if my deed says otherwise. Can they do that? Linda asked, genuine worry in her voice. I have no idea. Jake looked out the window at the lake. But I think we need to talk to a lawyer. A real one. That afternoon, Jake started making calls. Most attorneys he reached out to either didn't handle property disputes or wanted retainers he couldn't afford. Finally, on his sixth try, he got through to a lawyer named Rebecca Walsh who specialized in real estate law. "Come in tomorrow," she said after Jake explained the situation. "Bring every piece of documentation you have about the property. And I mean everything. Closing documents, title insurance, surveys, the HOA letter, all of it." The next day, Jake and Linda sat across from Rebecca in her office. She was younger than Jake expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catch everything. She spent a solid 20 minutes going through all their paperwork without saying a word. Finally, she looked up. "Okay, this is actually really interesting." "Interesting good or interesting bad?" Jake asked. "Interesting as in I can see exactly how this mess happened." Rebecca spread out several documents on her desk. "Your deed is absolutely legitimate. The lake and the land around it are 100% yours, but I can also see why the HOA thinks they own it." She pulled out a copy of the development plans the HOA had sent. When this community was first planned back in 2008, the developer did intend for the lake to be an HOA amenity. You can see it right here in the original plans. But here's where things get complicated. Rebecca grabbed another document from county records she'd apparently pulled. The developer went bankrupt in 2010. The whole project fell apart, and the property was sold off in chunks to different buyers to pay back creditors. Your lot, including the lake, was sold separately to a private investor who never joined the HOA. "So it was never actually given to the HOA?" Linda asked. "Exactly," Rebecca confirmed. "The developer went under before the property transfer could happen. That investor held onto the land for about 5 years, then sold it to the person you bought it from. The problem is the HOA either didn't know this happened or chose to ignore it. They just kept operating like they owned the lake." Jake leaned forward. "So what does that mean for us?" "It means you absolutely own this property," Rebecca said firmly. "There's a clear chain of title from the bankruptcy sale to you." "The HOA never had any legal claim to it. They've just been assuming it was theirs." "But what about this adverse possession thing they're threatening?" Jake asked. Rebecca made a face. "That's trickier. Adverse possession is real, but it requires meeting very specific conditions. They'd need to prove they've been using the property openly, continuously, exclusively, and under a claim of right for a certain number of years. In this state, that's 15 years. They said they've been maintaining it for 15 years, Linda pointed out. Right, but here's the key part, Rebecca said. They have to prove they believed in good faith that they owned it. That's hard to do when property deeds and surveys are public record. Any reasonable person could have checked and found out the lake wasn't actually theirs. She pulled out another document. And here's something I found that makes their case even weaker. Back in 2019, the HOA had a different attorney. I pulled some records and he actually sent them a memo warning them that the lake might not be HOA property. He recommended they investigate the title situation. Jake's eyes widened. So they knew? They knew they might not own it and just ignored it? That's what it looks like, Rebecca said. And if they knew there was a question about ownership but continued to claim it anyway, that destroys their adverse possession argument. You can't claim you believed in good faith you owned something if you were warned you might not. Can we prove they got that memo? Linda asked. That's what discovery is for, Rebecca said with a slight smile. If they sue, we get to ask for all their internal documents. That memo will come out, along with any other communications about the property. Jake felt hope rising for the first time since this whole mess started. So what do we do now? Rebecca picked up the HOA's threatening letter. We respond to this with our own letter. We lay out the entire title history. Include a current survey showing your property boundaries and make it very clear that you're the rightful owner. We also let them know that they've been maintaining your property without permission, and technically they owe you for that work. Will that make them back off? Jake asked. Rebecca hesitated. Honestly, probably not right away. HOAs can be stubborn, especially when they have homeowners angry at them about losing an amenity. They might double down before they back off, but we'll be establishing a clear record that you've asserted your rights and tried to resolve this reasonably. How much is this going to cost us? Linda asked quietly. I'll be straight with you, Rebecca said. If this goes to court, it could get expensive. But I think you've got a strong case, and more importantly, I think they know their case is weak. Once they realize we have that 2019 memo and we're not backing down, there's a good chance they'll settle. Jake and Linda looked at each other. They'd used up most of their savings buying the house. A legal battle could wipe them out financially. But the thought of giving up property they legally owned just because the HOA was bullying them made Jake's blood boil. "Let's do it," Jake said. "Send the letter," Rebecca nodded. "I'll draft it today and have it sent by the end of the week. In the meantime, document everything. If anyone from the HOA comes onto your property, take pictures, write down what was said, note the time and date. If you get any threatening messages or emails, save them all." They left Rebecca's office feeling simultaneously better and worse. Better because they knew they were right and had a good lawyer. Worse because they realized this fight was probably going to get ugly before it got better. Jake was proven right about that within days. Rebecca's letter went out on a Friday. By Monday morning, Jake woke up to find "Thief" spray-painted across his mailbox in bright red letters. Linda saw it first and called him outside. They stood there staring at it, both too shocked to speak at first. Who would do this? Linda finally asked, her voice shaking. "Someone from the HOA, probably," Jake said, anger rising in his chest. "Or maybe one of the neighbors who's mad about the lake." He took pictures from every angle, then called the police to file a report. The same Officer Thompson from before came out to document it. "This is harassment," Thompson said, writing up the report. "You might want to consider installing security cameras." "Yeah, I'm starting to think that's a good idea," Jake muttered. It got worse. Over the next few weeks, Jake's trash cans were knocked over repeatedly. Someone left a nasty note on his car windshield calling him selfish. Linda came home from work one day visibly upset because a neighbor had confronted her at the grocery store, saying Jake was ruining the community. The community Facebook page was even worse. Someone had posted about the lake situation and the comments were brutal. People Jake had never even met were calling him greedy, saying he was taking away a place where kids had learned to fish, accusing him of being a bad neighbor who didn't care about the community. "Maybe we should just let them have it," Linda said one night after finding another nasty note on their doorstep. "Is this really worth all the stress?" Jake understood where she was coming from. The harassment was taking a toll on both of them. But something in him refused to give in. "It's not about the lake anymore," he said. "It's about the principle. We bought this property legally. We didn't do anything wrong. If we back down now just because they're bullying us, what message does that send? That if you harass someone enough, you can take what's theirs?" Linda sighed. "I know you're right. I just hate this. I hate feeling like everyone in the neighborhood is against us." "They're not all against us," Jake said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "They're just hearing one side of the story. Once the truth comes out, people will understand." He hoped he was right about that. But as he looked out at the lake that evening, watching the sun set over the water, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that things were going to get worse before they got better. 2 weeks after Rebecca sent the letter explaining Jake's legal ownership of the lake, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. Jake found out about it from a neighbor who actually felt bad about everything that was happening. The agenda had one item: community lake access crisis. Linda didn't want him to go. "It's just going to be a bunch of angry people yelling at you," she said. She was right, but Jake felt like he needed to be there anyway. Maybe he could explain his side, help people understand that he wasn't trying to hurt anyone. The meeting was held at the community center, and when Jake walked in, the room went quiet. Every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. He'd never seen this many neighbors in one place. Patricia stood at the front next to 4 other board members, and the look she gave him could have frozen water. Jake found a spot to stand in the back, trying to make himself invisible. It didn't work. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her presentation. She had a slideshow and everything. Pictures of the lake, photos of kids fishing, images of families having picnics on the shore. "For 15 years, this lake has been the heart of our community," she said, her voice wavering with emotion. "It's where our children learned to fish, where families gathered for summer cookouts, where neighbors became friends." People in the audience were nodding along, some wiping their eyes. "And now," Patricia continued, pointing dramatically toward the back of the room where Jake stood, "someone has moved into our community and decided he wants to take all of that away. He wants to claim our lake as his private property and lock the rest of us out." The room erupted. People started yelling, some standing up from their seats. Jake felt his face burning red. "That's not what's happening." Jake shouted over the noise, but barely anyone could hear him. Patricia held up her hand for silence. "Mr. Wilson says he owns the lake. He has some paperwork that he claims gives him ownership, but we have 15 years of history. 15 years of maintenance. 15 years of treating this lake as community property. And the law recognizes something called adverse possession, which means that our long-term use gives us rights to this property. More applause from the crowd. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was making it sound like he was the villain in this story. A man in his 60s stood up. I taught my grandson to fish at that lake. Now you're saying we can't go there anymore? That's exactly what I'm saying, Patricia confirmed. Unless we fight this, which is why the board is voting tonight to authorize up to $50,000 in legal fees to protect our community amenity. $50,000. Jake felt sick. That was serious money. Money that could keep this legal battle going for months, maybe years. Another woman raised her hand. What if we just paid him for access? Like rent or something? Patricia shook her head firmly. That would be admitting he owns it. We can't do that. We have to fight for what's rightfully ours. Jake raised his hand, but Patricia ignored him. He raised it higher. Can I please say something? This is a board meeting, not a public forum, Patricia said coldly. You're talking about me. I should at least get to explain my side. Jake's voice was louder than he intended, but he was frustrated beyond belief. One of the other board members, an older man named Harold, spoke up. Let him talk, Patricia. It's only fair. Patricia looked annoyed but gestured toward Jake. Fine, 2 minutes. Jake made his way to the front of the room, every eye following him. His hands were shaking a little, but he tried to keep his voice steady. I know you're all upset and I understand why, he started, but I need you to understand something. I didn't steal your lake. I didn't take anything from anyone. When I bought my house 3 months ago, the lake was part of the property. It was on the deed. The title company verified it. My lawyer verified it. I paid for that lake as part of my purchase. So you admit you're claiming it, someone yelled from the crowd. I'm not claiming something that's already mine, Jake said. Look, I get that you've been using it for years. But nobody asked the previous owners for permission. The HOA just assumed it was theirs and started using it. That doesn't make it legally yours. We maintained it, a woman shouted. We paid for landscaping, we stocked it with fish, we built the dock. And I appreciate that, Jake said, trying to sound reasonable. But you did all that on property you don't own. That's not my fault. I didn't ask you to do it. Patricia jumped back in. Your 2 minutes are up. Everyone, we need to vote on the legal fund authorization. Wait, Jake said quickly. I'm not trying to be unreasonable here. Maybe we can work something out. Some kind of agreement where we're not negotiating with someone who's trying to steal community property. Patricia cut him off. All in favor of authorizing $50,000 for legal action. All 5 board members raised their hands. The crowd applauded. Jake stood there feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Meeting adjourned, Patricia announced. She started gathering her materials, refusing to make eye contact with Jake. As people filed out, Jake heard the whispers and the not-so-quiet comments. Greedy. Selfish. Can't believe he won't just do the right thing. One older couple actually stopped to talk to him. We understand you think you're right, the woman said gently. But is it really worth tearing the community apart over? Jake didn't know how to answer that. He just walked out to his car, feeling lower than he'd felt in years. The next morning, Jake got a call from Rebecca. They filed the lawsuit, she said without preamble. Just got served with the papers. That was fast, Jake muttered. They're motivated. Probably worried about the homeowners turning on them if they don't look like they're fighting hard. Rebecca paused. There's something else. They're not just suing for the lake. They're claiming you owe them $75,000 for all the maintenance and improvements they've made over the years. Jake almost dropped the phone.
What? How can they charge me for work I didn't ask for?
They're arguing that they improved your property in good faith, thinking it was theirs. It's a stretch, but it's meant to intimidate you. Make the stakes higher so you'll want to settle. I can't afford $75,000, Jake said, panic rising in his voice. I can barely afford you. Relax, Rebecca said. That claim won't hold up. But this is what I warned you about. They're going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Are you prepared for this to get messy? Jake looked out his window at the lake. His lake. I don't have much choice now, do I? The lawsuit changed everything. Suddenly it wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. It was real, with real legal consequences. Jake had to give a deposition, which meant sitting in a conference room while the HOA's attorney asked him hostile questions for 4 hours straight. The worst part, was when they brought up every little thing. Did he know about the lake when he toured the house? Yes. Did he specifically want a property with a lake? Yes. Did he think it was suspicious that a private lake was included in a community development? No, he just trusted what the paperwork said. They were trying to make him look like he'd known there was a problem and bought the house anyway, trying to take advantage. It was ridiculous but exhausting to defend against. The harassment at home continued too. Someone let the air out of his tires one night. Another time he found dog waste left on his front porch. Linda was getting random hang-up calls during the day. The neighbor kids who used to wave at them now just stared silently when they drove by. We could still back out, Linda said one night over a dinner neither of them was really eating. Just give them the lake. Move on with our lives, Jake shook his head. I talked to Rebecca about that. Even if we wanted to give them the lake now, they'd probably still come after us for their legal fees. We're in too deep, so what do? We trust Rebecca. She says she's got a plan for discovery. Jake tried to sound more confident than he felt. She's going to request all their internal documents. That memo from 2019 that warned them about the lake ownership. Once that comes out, their whole case falls apart. And if it doesn't? Linda asked quietly. Jake didn't have an answer for that. All he could do was hope that the truth would be enough. That documentation would beat assumption. That right would win over mob mentality. But sitting there in his kitchen, looking at the mounting legal bills and feeling the weight of an entire community's anger pressing down on him, Jake wasn't sure hope was going to be enough. The lawsuit was real now. The battle lines were drawn. And there was no turning back. No matter how much easier that might have been, all he could do was hold on and pray that justice actually worked the way it was supposed to. The breakthrough came 4 months into the lawsuit. During Patricia's deposition, Jake wasn't there in person, but Rebecca called him immediately after it was over. He could hear the excitement in her voice. We got her, Rebecca said. She completely fell apart on the stand. Jake had been replacing his mailbox for the 3rd time that month when his phone rang. He set down his tools and sat on his porch steps. What happened? I asked her when she first became aware that the lake might not be HOA property, Rebecca explained. She said she didn't know until you made your claim, so I showed her the email from 2019, the one from their previous attorney warning them about the ownership issue. And she went pale, started stammering. Her lawyer called for a break, but the damage was done. She just lied under oath, and we had the documentation to prove it. Rebecca sounded almost gleeful. They knew for 4 years that they didn't own that lake. They knew, and they kept collecting money from homeowners for lake maintenance anyway. Jake felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. So what happens now? Now their attorney is going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with them about the difference between a weak case and a losing case. I'd be shocked if we don't get a settlement offer within 2 weeks. Rebecca was right, but it only took 1 week. The HOA's attorney called to request a settlement conference. They met at a neutral office downtown. Jake and Rebecca on one side of the table, Patricia and 2 other board members with their attorney on the other. Patricia wouldn't look at Jake. She kept her eyes down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The other board members looked tired and defeated. The HOA's attorney cleared his throat. My clients would like to avoid further litigation. We're prepared to offer a settlement. We're listening, Rebecca said calmly. The HOA will acknowledge Mr. Wilson's ownership of the lake and surrounding property. We'll update all community documents to reflect this. We'll also agree to pay his legal fees, which I understand are approximately $35,000. Jake felt relief flood through him. It was over. He'd won, but Rebecca wasn't done. And what about the harassment? The vandalism? The damage to my client's property and reputation? The attorney shifted uncomfortably. The board can't be held responsible for individual actions of residents. The board president led a campaign that painted my client as a thief, Rebecca said firmly. She held meetings where she encouraged hostility toward him. At minimum, there needs to be a formal apology and a clear communication to all residents setting the record straight. Patricia finally looked up, her eyes red. Fine, we'll send a letter. Not just a letter, Rebecca pressed. A meeting, where you explain to everyone what actually happened, how the HOA made a mistake, how you knew about it and ignored it, and how Mr. Wilson has been the rightful owner all along. You can't be serious, Patricia said, her voice breaking. I'm completely serious, Rebecca replied. Otherwise, we go to trial, and all of this comes out in court documents that become public record. Your call. The other attorney whispered something to Patricia. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. Okay, we'll hold a meeting. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The HOA paid Jake's legal fees and agreed to hold a community meeting to set the record straight. They also agreed to update all their maps, remove the lake from their bylaws, and refund the special assessments they'd been collecting for lake maintenance for the past 4 years. That money would be distributed back to the homeowners. Jake thought that would be the end of it. But the real turning point came at the community meeting. The room was packed again, just like before. But this time the energy was different. Confused instead of angry, Patricia stood at the front and she looked like she'd aged 10 years. I owe everyone an apology, she began, her voice shaky, especially Mr. Wilson. The lake that we've all been using as a community amenity was never actually HOA property. When the original developer went bankrupt in 2010, the lake was sold separately to a private investor. It was never transferred to the HOA. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People looked at each other in confusion. But we've been maintaining it for 15 years, someone called out. I know, Patricia said, and that's where I made a serious mistake. In 2019, our attorney at the time sent me an email warning that we might not actually own the lake. He recommended we investigate the title. She paused, her voice cracking. I didn't follow up on it. I thought he was being overly cautious. I assumed that because we'd been using it for so long, it had to be ours. I was wrong. The room was silent now. Jake stood in the back again, watching people's faces as the truth sank in. Mr. Wilson bought his property legally, Patricia continued. The lake was included in his deed. He paid for it, he owns it. And instead of accepting that and trying to work with him, I let my pride get in the way. I led a campaign against him. I encouraged you all to be angry at him, and he didn't deserve any of it. I'm deeply sorry. One of the other board members stood up. We're all sorry. The board voted to authorize this lawsuit based on incomplete information. We should have done our due diligence. This is on us, not Mr. Wilson. After the meeting, something unexpected happened. People started coming up to Jake to apologize. The older couple who'd questioned him after the first meeting. The neighbor whose kids used to fish at the lake. Even the guy who'd confronted Linda at the grocery store. I feel terrible, the woman with the grandson said, tears in her eyes. We vandalized your mailbox. My husband and I. We were just so angry and we thought, I'm so sorry. Jake didn't know what to say. He'd spent months being angry at these people, feeling betrayed by his own community. But looking at their faces now, he just felt tired. I understand, he said. You thought you were losing something important. I get it. Over the next few weeks, things started to change. The hostile stares stopped. People waved when he drove by. Someone even left a basket of muffins on his porch with an apology note. But the biggest surprise came from a man named Tom, who lived 3 streets over. He knocked on Jake's door one Saturday morning. I'm Tom Chen. I'm on the new HOA board. We voted Patricia out last month. He extended his hand and Jake shook it. I wanted to talk to you about something. They sat on Jake's back porch looking out at the lake. A lot of families are really sad about losing access to the lake, Tom said. I know you have every right to keep it private, but I wanted to ask if you'd consider some kind of arrangement. Limited access, maybe certain hours with a proper legal agreement. Jake had thought about this. He and Linda had talked about it a lot. What did you have in mind? Weekend afternoons during the summer, Tom suggested. Maybe Saturday and Sunday from 1 to 5. We'd draw up a formal license agreement, get proper insurance, pay you fair rent. You'd have complete control over the rules. It would all be on your terms. How much rent are we talking about? Jake asked. We were thinking $500 a month during the summer season. The HOA would carry full liability insurance, and there'd be a big sign making it clear it's your private property, and access is by your permission only. Jake looked out at the water. He thought about those kids who'd learned to fish there, about the families who'd had picnics on the shore, about the community that had turned against him but was now trying to make things right. Let me talk to Linda, Jake said. But yeah, I think we can work something out. The agreement was finalized a month later. The first Saturday the lake was open under the new arrangement. Jake stood on his dock and watched families arrive. There was a new sign at the water's edge that read, Private property of Jake Wilson. Community access by permission. Please respect the rules. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, caught her first fish that afternoon. Her dad helped her reel it in, and when she held it up, her face was pure joy. She carefully released it back into the water like the new rules required, watching it swim away. The dad looked over at Jake and nodded his thanks. Jake nodded back. Linda came out and stood beside him, sliding her arm around his waist. "You did good," she said quietly. "We did good," Jake corrected. "You stuck with me through all of it. Was it worth it?" she asked. "All the stress, all the fighting?" Jake watched the little girl cast her line again, her tongue sticking out in concentration. He thought about the months of harassment, the legal bills, the sleepless nights. He thought about standing up for what was right even when everyone was against him. "Yeah," he said finally, "it was worth it. Not because we won, because we didn't back down when we knew we were right, and because we found a way to make something good come out of it in the end." That evening, after all the families had left and the lake was quiet again, Jake grabbed his fishing rod. He walked down to the dock, cast his line out into the still water, and finally had the peaceful fishing morning he'd been trying to have 6 months ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The water was calm, and for the first time since he'd moved in, Jake felt like he was truly home. Sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest path to take. Sometimes standing your ground means standing alone, but in the end, the truth has a way of winning out. And sometimes, just sometimes, people surprise you by being big enough to admit when they were wrong. Jake sat there as the stars started to come out, feeling the gentle tug of a fish testing his line, and thought about how far they'd all come, from that angry morning with Patricia to this peaceful evening, from enemies to neighbors who could at least try to understand each other. He wasn't naive enough to think everything was perfect now. Some neighbors probably still resented him. The memory of the conflict would linger for a while, but they'd found a way forward, a way that honored both his legal rights and the community's attachment to the place, and that was worth more than winning any lawsuit could ever be. The fish bit, and Jake smiled as he started to reel it in. Finally, after all these months, he was just a guy fishing at his own lake, just like he'd always wanted.